my dad told me way back, just don't go in the river, don't wade in it, don't go in it, swim in it.
Why is there a dangerous Superfund site surrounded by homes, restaurants, and stores in this small town?
The company indiscriminately produced and promoted the use of DDT.
The sediment there, I was told at one of our community meetings, had the highest level of DDT ever recorded in the United States in environmental sample.
The plant was at the center of one of the worst food contamination accidents in U.S. history.
The cattle feed mistake was just an inevitable result of the way they operated.
They should dig it all up and get it away from the river. Even if they bury it somewhere else in Gratiot County, it's insane to have it by a moving body of water.
Those plans were fatally flawed because we let a lot of contaminants stay on site and near a river with no way to absolutely be certain we're going to keep the contaminants on site and keep them from migrating.
The community envisions the landscape of the future. To make their hopes and dreams more concrete, they placed their own monument at the gates of the plant site.
We had to come to the realization that the community advisory group, the community in general, had to come with the realization that these effects are permanent. Effectively, from human perspectives, they're permanent. So once you accept that you're not ever going to be able to use this groundwater, ever, you don't even know where these contaminants are in sand seams that run underground. They still could wreak havoc to nearby wells in future years. We just don't know.
The Velsicol Chemical Company began operation in the small town of St. Louis, Michigan in 1935. This company stimulated the local economy for decades and produced chemicals like fire retardants.
Fire retardants are now in a lot of things. They're probably in this table. They're in, all sorts of automobile parts. They were put in garments, especially children's pajamas, to supposedly protect them in fires and this sort of thing.
Throughout its lifetime, it became clear that Velsicol was doing more harm than expected and was guilty of dumping hazardous chemicals into the nearby Pine River. Chemicals like DDT, an insecticide, became abundant not only in the surface water of the river, but the groundwater and soil surrounding the chemical company as well. To make matters worse, in the 1960s, the company made a massive error and was responsible for a shipping mistake, causing farmers to receive shipments of fire retardant instead of animal feed.
This company does what companies continue to do and have done for generations, and that is externalize costs. Those costs dealing with handling dangerous chemicals and waste products in the process of manufacturing, in this case chemicals.
And so that led then to a couple years of intense efforts to control this problem. It ended up thousands of cattle were shot and millions of chickens, this sort of thing, but not before this got into the food chain, and it's estimated 8 million people ate contaminated food.
These errors eventually led to the shutdown of the site and mass concern over the fate of the town.
And then we got into the problem of, well, what's going to happen? There were health studies launched, including a huge one that is still going on of 6,000 people who volunteered to be followed to see what were the consequences of exposure. Also, naturally, as a result of what they had done, they were sued by everything from farmers to the workers in the chemical plant to just consumers of food. Eventually, the company reached a settlement with the state and the federal government. They agreed to shut down, demolish the plant on site, contain the contaminants at the site supposedly, pay for some of the other cost of this, millions of dollars, and then get out of town. And so that happened beginning in 1979. They shut down as a company in St. Louis. And then over the next few years, they demolished the plant right where it was. They buried it and walked out of the state.
The citizens of St. Louis had multiple community advisory meetings with the EPA, which led to the creation of the Pine River Task Force.
They had a sign-up sheet at the end of that meeting. If anybody was interested in forming a community advisory group. And I signed up, and a bunch of other people did. And so we met in December of 97, and we decided that, we definitely wanted to do it. We chose officers. And then in January, we actually incorporated ourselves as a nonprofit. And off we went. And we called ourselves a task force because we thought, we might have to put in 5 years in this effort. But it's just a task. It'll have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then we'll go do other things. Well, that was 1998, and now it's 2019. So it wasn't 5 years.
However, the community had multiple issues with the EPA when it came to cleanup of the site.
One of the things that disturbed me when I was mayor, I had a meeting with, at the time, she was the project manager for the EPA. We were having lunch, and it was just for a casual discussion. And I asked her if she thought that, I said, what would happen if the water ever showed any chemical contamination in the city? And I said, would you tell us? And she said, yes, we would. And a year later, I found out that they knew well before that discussion that the water had been contaminated with PCBSA, and no one ever mentioned it.
Despite the setbacks, the community of St. Louis showed intense determination to solve the problem, and cleanup has continued in multiple phases since the 1990s.
Because of the community advisory group, really because of what Professor Lorenz has done and the community in general,
Technical advisor.
We have done about as good of a job as technically possible in cleaning that river sediment. That was the first thing. The river sediment was highly contaminated. We had to get it out of there. And we did what I thought was a really excellent, we still had, it doesn't mean we weren't, had some conflict with EPA on costs and whatever. But in the end, I don't know how much better it could have been done. So that's good news.
The biggest cleanup so far was in the impoundment area of the river. They dug out sediment in there, 750,000 cubic yards of contaminated sediment. And they expected that they might have to go down as deep as 10 feet in some areas, but they went 15, 20 feet down. And it was a lot more than what they expected. We found that to be a theme with dealing with Velsicol's wastes. Even if Velsical has written down exactly what they buried somewhere, it's easily double every time. So that cleanup, what cost $97 million of taxpayer money. The radioactive site was out east of St. Louis, and it wasn't very big, maybe half an acre of area. But again, it was much more than they expected. It was almost triple the amount in there. And so that was a wonderful cleanup to get behind us. I mentioned the PCBSA and the St. Louis drinking water wells, and now finally, as of 2015, St. Louis has clean water to drink. We saw the excavation in 2015 of the high school athletic fields, and then the neighborhood excavation of 12 blocks of contaminated soil in people's yards ended in 2016. The finish date in the future for the 52-acre chemical plant site is at this time estimated to be 2036.
Despite these intense cleanup efforts, it is clear that these chemicals are here to stay.
And now these chemicals happen to be long-lived, chemical hydrophobic, compounds that will remain in the environment, will continue to bioaccumulate for generations. So,
Yeah, new term, isn't it? Forever chemicals, they're calling it.
Yeah, forever chemicals.
Yeah.
The water in St. Louis, Michigan may be permanently affected, but this catastrophe can serve as a lesson for future generations on the impact of our actions.
So I think the one big lesson, and I think there are a couple, but one especially that I like to emphasize is we knew this company was dumping. I think I mentioned how as soon as they started operation in 1935, there was a complaint by the Saginaw City Council. It wasn't just somebody in town said, I don't think this is good. Saginaw City Council, it was in the official records of the City Council, unanimously passed a resolution asking for something to be done about the Pine River contamination. Not to go through all these, but in 1941, it's like 120 some citizens in St. Louis complained to the state about the contamination of the river. All through the late 1940s, we had warnings about the dangers of DDT. In the 50s and the 60s, all this way before the mistake with the animal feed, it brought them attention. There were plenty of people warning that this isn't safe. So I think one lesson of this is we have to listen to warnings, and these were warnings that were published, they got coverage in the media, but then other interests who wanted not to have to worry about things like this just ignored them.
There is a positive part of this story, and that is that when communities are allowed to have a say and allowed to voice concerns, a better job happens, a better job gets done. Mm-hmm. And that is both with industry and with government work.
I really think it's time for factories of all kinds, industry of all kinds, to take into account the costs of disposing of their waste in such a way that it does not harm the environment. It's going to make things more expensive for us when we go to buy something. But I really think that if we don't do that, this is a bad situation here, but think of the ocean now just getting polluted, and even in pristine areas like in the Arctic, all that stuff going up there. We can't have that. We just can't. This is the only world we have, and we need to clean up our act.